There's a strange pattern most people notice eventually, usually late at night or after one too many repeat disappointments. Certain people don't just bother you, they unsettle you. It's not loud fear or obvious threat. It's subtler than that. A tight feeling, an urge to withdraw, an immediate judgment that feels automatic and justified. And what's unsettling is how consistent it is. Different settings, different faces, same reaction. You tell yourself it's bad luck, or that you just attract difficult people. But the pattern doesn't care what you call it. It keeps showing up anyway. Carl Jung warned that when parts of ourselves remain unseen, they don't stay quiet. They move outward. They disguise themselves as other people. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The people who trigger fear, irritation, or discomfort often aren't doing anything extraordinary. They're simply expressing something you've learned not to. They take up space where you stay contained. They assert where you hesitate. They display traits you've quietly buried because they didn't fit the version of yourself you decided was acceptable. And so when you meet them, the reaction feels immediate and emotional, not logical. You can't explain it cleanly. You just know you don't like them, or you don't trust them, or you feel small around them. But fear doesn't always point to danger. Sometimes it points to recognition. Jung understood this uncomfortable truth. What we avoid internally doesn't disappear. It waits. Then it finds a face. What we do not face in ourselves, we meet as fate. This isn't about blaming yourself for other people's behavior. It's about noticing why certain behaviors strike a nerve while others pass by unnoticed. Why some personalities feel threatening before they've done anything at all. The shadow doesn't announce itself clearly. It whispers through discomfort. It hides inside strong reactions. And it has a way of introducing you to the very people you claim you never want to meet. You've met these people before. The ones who unsettle you, make your chest tighten, or seem almost designed to push your buttons. At first, it feels like coincidence, bad luck, a quirk of timing. But patterns rarely arise from nothing. There's a reason these encounters feel so sharp, so personal. It isn't in them. It's in you. What you're reacting to, the fear, the irritation, the envy, isn't entirely about their behavior. It's about something you've hidden, denied, or ignored within yourself. Something you've tucked away because it felt dangerous, unacceptable, or too raw to face. Carl Jung gave that hidden part a name. The shadow. And understanding it, even just a little, is the first step to understanding why the people who scare you so much keep showing up. The shadow isn't some mystical entity lurking in the dark corners of your mind. It's you. The part of you that you've tried, often for years, to ignore. It's everything you deny in yourself. The anger you push down, the jealousy you pretend isn't there. The competitiveness you hide, the arrogance you refuse to admit you feel. These aren't inherently bad. They're simply parts of you that you decided didn't belong in your conscious self-image. Jung described it simply. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. Think about that for a moment. The darker it is, the more you refuse to face it. The denser it is, the more likely it is to move gently through your life, shaping your choices, steering your reactions, and pulling you toward situations that force confrontation. The shadow is not a warning, it's a companion you've ignored. And like any companion kept in the dark, it begins to make its presence known in ways you don't expect. Imagine you pride yourself on being calm and composed. On the surface, you handle situations with ease, you avoid conflict, and you keep a polite distance from anything messy. But deep inside, there's impatience. There's irritation that surfaces in small, almost imperceptible ways. You might snap at a friend for something minor, or feel a pang of resentment at someone else's success. You deny it, shove it away, and maybe even scold yourself for feeling it. That irritation, that small rebellion, is part of your shadow. It isn't bad, but it's unacknowledged. The shadow thrives in the absence of attention. The more you refuse to face it, the more it grows. It doesn't disappear because you don't like it. It only waits for an outlet. And here's the crucial part. When a trait is denied internally, it will often appear externally, not as a quiet nudge inside you, but as a confrontation in the world. Someone else will act in a way that mirrors your unrecognized qualities. Someone will be loud when you are quiet, aggressive when you are passive, confident when you doubt yourself, and it will irritate or frighten you. The shadow also isn't just about negative traits. Sometimes it's the hidden strength you refuse to claim, the ambition you silence, or the part of yourself that knows how to fight when you've been taught to avoid confrontation. And when you meet someone who embodies those traits, the reaction is usually intense. You might feel admiration mixed with fear, or a strange envy you can't name. This is the shadow speaking through another person, holding up a mirror to what you deny in yourself. Jung emphasized that recognizing the shadow isn't about judgment. It isn't about labeling yourself as bad or flawed. It's about awareness. Once a trait is recognized, it loses its uncontrolled horse over you. It moves from being a secret driver of your reactions to a part of you that can be consciously integrated. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This darkness isn't something to eradicate. It's not a problem to be solved. It's part of what makes you whole. The shadow is simply the part of you that waits, often silently, for acknowledgement. And until it is acknowledged, it will continue to shape your life. Through the people you meet, the conflicts you face, and the fear you feel. It's not an easy truth. Most of us spend decades trying to convince ourselves that we are entirely the person we show to the world. The shadow is proof that we are more complex, more contradictory, and far less tidy than we like to admit. But in its unflinching presence lies a strange kind of power, the chance to see yourself as you really are, and through that recognition, to stop being unconsciously pushed through life by the very parts of yourself you refuse to face. Recognizing the shadow is uncomfortable, even terrifying. It isn't neat. It isn't tidy. And it doesn't politely wait for you to sit down with a cup of tea and think about it. It leaks into the world, disguised as people, situations, and emotions that feel too big to manage. The irony is almost cruel. The very traits you refuse to face internally are the ones you'll encounter most clearly in the outside world. And when that happens, your reaction is immediate. You feel it in your chest first, tightness, heat, a pulse of alarm, and then it spreads to your thoughts, judgment, distrust, fear. You can't stop it. You didn't even invite it. But what feels like random fear is not random at all. It's a magnet, and the world, like a mirror, responds. Fear is strange. It feels defensive, protective, even urgent. But its force isn't always about actual danger. Often, it's a signal, a kind of psychological compass pointing straight at the parts of yourself you've disowned. The traits you refuse to admit, the impulses you suppress, the desires you deny, they all gather under the surface like storm clouds. And when you meet someone who embodies those qualities openly, the fear hits with the same intensity as a physical threat. Carl Jung phrased it plainly. What we do not face in ourselves, we meet as fate. Fate, in this sense, isn't cosmic justice. It isn't punishment. It's the world echoing what you refuse to acknowledge within. Your internal resistance to your own shadow creates a tension that draws out its reflection in others. The very qualities you fear, resent, or dislike are amplified when projected onto someone else. Imagine someone bold, confrontational, or unapologetically confident. If you've spent years keeping your own assertiveness hidden, every encounter with such a person feels like a collision. Your body tightens, your mind spirals through defensiveness, and the fear rises before you even understand why. You're reacting not just to them, but to the part of yourself that has been silenced. Fear works like a magnet because it is emotional recognition disguised as danger. You feel threatened not because the other person is objectively threatening, but because they embody what you cannot allow yourself to embody. They are alive in ways you are not, and that makes the hidden parts of you scream for acknowledgement. This is why patterns repeat. You don't just meet one bold or arrogant person in your life. You meet many. Different faces, different settings, same visceral reaction. It's not coincidence. It's your own fear acting like a homing device, pulling the world toward the parts of yourself you refuse to see. Every time the pattern repeats, it's a reflection of something still unclaimed. The magnetism of fear also explains why these encounters feel disproportionate. The person who triggers you isn't necessarily worse, meaner, or more dangerous than anyone else, but they hold up a mirror to your shadow, and mirrors are brutal. The reflection is sudden, sharp, and unavoidable, and your instinct is to push it away, label it, or blame it entirely on them. But the truth is far simpler and darker. The outside world only appears threatening because the threat has always been inside. Your fear points to recognition, not judgment. And that recognition is uncomfortable because it forces you to confront the truth you've buried beneath politeness, restraint, or self-denial. Eventually, if you allow it, fear becomes less of a curse and more of a guide. It doesn't disappear, but its intensity changes when you start noticing what it points to. You begin to see that the people who unsettle you aren't enemies. They are the indicators of unfinished business within yourself. Fear is magnetic because it seeks completion. The traits you deny attract their reflection until you claim them consciously. Until then, every encounter feels like fate, every reaction like instinct, and every fear like a warning sign you can't quite read. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. It's unsettling, brutally so. But this is the paradox. The very qualities that scare you the most are not external threats. They are pieces of yourself waiting to be seen. And the people who carry them openly are simply the signals your psyche has been sending all along. Once projection is at work, life begins to feel like a mirror maze. The people who trigger you, who make your pulse spike or your jaw clench, don't vanish after a single encounter. They keep appearing, sometimes in new forms, sometimes in familiar ones, but always carrying the same unsettling traits. It isn't bad luck. It isn't fate. It's the shadow at work, echoing through the world until you finally pay attention. The traits you refuse to claim in yourself don't go away. They follow you, reappearing like persistent shadows, insisting on recognition. Every repetition is a message, not a mistake. Every uncomfortable encounter is an opportunity to notice, reflect, and perhaps, eventually, understand. If you've ever noticed the same patterns in your relationships, friendships, or work life, you've already seen this truth. The same dynamics show up over and over. It doesn't matter the city, the company, or the circle of friends. The same type of person finds you, often unconsciously drawn by the qualities you deny in yourself. Jung understood this as a consequence of the unacknowledged shadow. The traits you refuse to face internally will manifest externally, both in your behavior and in the people you attract. Until you claim them, they appear in the world like persistent echoes. And because these encounters are often charged with fear, anger, or discomfort, they leave a lasting impression, making it feel as if life itself conspires to test you. Consider someone who constantly encounters controlling personalities. At first, you might think it's coincidence, or that certain people are just like that. But over time, a pattern emerges. Different workplaces, different friends, different cities, even strangers on the street reflect the same type of energy. Why? Because somewhere deep inside, control or domination is a trait you've denied, resisted, or feared in yourself. The world simply presents it back, often in exaggerated form, until you face it consciously. The repetition is uncomfortable, sometimes unbearable. Every encounter triggers the same knot of anxiety, the same instinctive defensiveness. You might react with irritation, avoidance, or even hostility, and each time it feels inevitable, as if the universe has placed the same test in your path. Yet this is exactly the point. The repetition exists to force awareness, to make the unconscious conscious. These encounters also reveal the ways you have learned to cope or fail to cope. Do you lash out, retreat, or try to rationalize what you feel? Each response is a clue, a fingerprint of the shadow's influence. Jung would argue that these patterns are not punishment. They are invitations to recognize the traits you project outward, the qualities you deny internally, and the emotional triggers that control your behavior. Even when the people themselves disappear, the patterns continue. Someone new steps into your life, carrying the same energy, the same impulses, the same triggers. Life has a way of replicating these dynamics, because the underlying issue hasn't been addressed. The shadow is patient, relentless, and often cruelly persistent. It waits for you to notice, reflect, and claim the part of yourself that has remained hidden. There is also a subtle horror in recognizing how unconscious this process can be. You might think you've escaped certain types of people or dynamics, only to find them re-emerging under a different guise. The world doesn't punish you, it mirrors you. Every repeated encounter is the shadow saying, "You cannot outrun this. You must see it, or it will see you first." This repetition is not random, nor is it a test of endurance. It is information. It tells you what you have denied. It shows you the traits you suppress, the fears you avoid, and the projections you cannot yet face. The encounters may be uncomfortable, even terrifying, but they are also instructive. They are reflections, not coincidences. Jung emphasized the point. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. When repetition is recognized, something shifts. The pattern no longer feels like a trap. The people who once triggered fear or irritation are no longer enemies. They are teachers in disguise, holding mirrors to the traits you've refused to see. The encounters lose some of their sting, and life begins to feel less like a series of attacks and more like a dialogue, a dark, uncomfortable, but necessary dialogue with yourself. The key lies in noticing, without judgment, the recurrence. Each time the same type of person appears, pause and reflect. What part of myself am I denying that draws this here? What fear am I avoiding that gives it power over me? The moment you begin to answer these questions, repetition becomes less punishment and more opportunity. Life's shadows are patient, and they often demand persistence. Repetition is their method of insisting on acknowledgement. Until the shadow is recognized, the same encounters will continue to appear, sometimes subtly, sometimes brutally. But they always point to the same truth. The parts of yourself you avoid will find you again and again until you finally meet them. The repetition isn't random, and it isn't a curse. It's an invitation. Every encounter that triggers fear, anger, or discomfort is a spotlight on the parts of yourself you've hidden. You can avoid it, push it away, or rationalize it. But the shadow is patient. It waits. At some point, the only way to break the cycle is to stop seeing these people as threats and start seeing them as mirrors. Not as teachers in a warm, comforting sense, but as stark, unflinching reflections of what you've refused to own. Turning toward the shadow doesn't feel heroic. It doesn't feel safe. But it is the only way forward. Facing your shadow is not a gentle process. It is raw, uncomfortable, and often unsettling. This isn't about imagining a grander, enlightened version of yourself. It's about noticing the darker, messier traits you've suppressed, the impulses you've denied, and the fears you've buried. It is about standing in front of the mirror and seeing the unflinching truth of who you are, without excuses. Carl Jung warned against illusions. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The shadow isn't something to admire, and it's not meant to be integrated like a charming quality. It is real, stubborn, and often uncomfortable. Turning toward it requires noticing your emotional spikes, the irritation, envy, fear, or discomfort that arises in everyday interactions, and asking, what part of me is reacting? What am I denying in myself that this person shows so clearly? This process begins with observation rather than action. It doesn't demand that you become like the person who triggers you, or that you embrace traits you're not ready for. It begins with recognition. You notice the fear, you trace it back, and you identify the suppressed part of yourself it reflects. It's brutal and simple at the same time. Notice, name, and acknowledge. For example, if someone's boldness scares you, don't force yourself to act boldly immediately. Instead, ask, why does this make me recoil? Where have I silenced this part of myself? That is turning toward the shadow without romanticizing it. You are not seeking courage for the sake of courage. You are seeking awareness for the sake of survival, understanding, and eventually, freedom from unconscious patterns. Acknowledging the shadow doesn't make life suddenly easy, and it doesn't make fear disappear. What it does is shift the balance. The traits that once controlled your reactions stop hiding in the dark. They become visible, understandable, and manageable. People who used to trigger intense fear or irritation no longer feel like threats. They become mirrors you can look into without flinching. Patterns that once repeated endlessly begin to break. The magnetism that drew certain personalities toward you weakens because the internal energy that created it has been recognized. You stop seeing your triggers as enemies and start seeing them as signals, clues about the traits you've avoided, the impulses you've denied, the emotions you've silenced. Jung put it plainly, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Acknowledgement doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't make the shadow vanish. It means choice. Awareness replaces compulsion. The encounters that once haunted you no longer control you. They inform you. And for the first time, you move through life with a measure of clarity and agency, even when darkness is present.